Good morning, all. Well, as some Monday's great because it's always this day of excitement, a new week, new things to go at. See how that delivers over the course of the week. But yeah, Mondays are always fresh, especially after having a bit of a break. Hope that worked well for you, and that you were behind and stuff, you got caught up. If you weren't behind, you got ahead, and somewhere in there, you got some time for you, because that's important too. All right. Trying to get things back on sync here for us. We've have a in terms of the flow within the course, we've finished a unit, starting a new one, kind of idea. Although they're tightly related in that we finished off the connecting number one piece, and we're moving into connecting two within the Moodle framework that we've got. The difference there is connecting one was a really theoretical piece around, well, how do we implement cellular, what other things can we do for transmit of IoT type stuff. So you had just some documents to read, and hopefully out of that you had a look and thought, okay, yeah, they've developed some technologies that are more geared towards what IoT payloads look like. So if we think about things like cellular or Wi-Fi, they were designed with very different data models in mind, and so they're not really excellent at doing IoT type stuff. They're really good at other things, but not so much the IoT side of things. And so we saw within the reading, there were some other technologies to go along with those things that are much more geared towards midterm week, much more geared towards IoT type. They're small and distant and not continuous. So for example, in Cell, which is designed for voice calls, you've got fairly low bandwidth, but you have continuous streams of it. And that's, in a lot of IoT scenarios, that's not the case. We just don't have that continuous stream of high-end data in most scenarios. Where we do, then running to Cell is a fantastic option. But if we don't have that ongoing stream, then do we really want to set up a cell call, or can we use one of those other longer range, lower band technologies? And that's what we've talked a little bit about it. Mostly, hey, here's some reading. If you've got some questions around it, let's talk about that. So I give you a chance to bring that forward in terms of if we can deal with it this week. But I want to set some dates. Dan, remind me, this is midterm week for you guys. I think you have potentially 3 midterms. Is that right? 207, 221, 225? Somebody type something. Oh, just 2. Okay, good. No 207, right? Okay, good. So 221 and 225. And are they both this week? Okay. Perfect. That's actually kind of nice if they're both this week, because I have 3 dates for us to set, and I want to do it with those midterms in mind. So that's helpful, because actually that works really well for us. So the first one I've got is let's do next lab performance session, 15th, which is so this Friday's lab first, March 8th, then March 15th. So it's a little bit away. But at that time, you're going to develop the next set of stuff. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like today. So we'll introduce it today, so you can start with your brain churning on it with a bunch of work happening basically at the end of this week. So probably most of you, if you've got midterms on Wednesday, we'll kind of kick into, okay, let's do the next build piece starting on Friday in our lab time, which is fine. That's a good time, but I want to introduce it today so it can bubble in the back of your brain for the week. All right, so we'll get that on the tail. That one is March 15th. It'll look similar to what we did last time, but I said we're probably going to have the presentations will be a little longer, so I'll have to be a little more cognizant about who needs to be we'll run it in a couple of groups, a first group and a second group in terms of the timelines for the day. And I'm going to ask you for some latitude on this, in that people who are in Pat's lab obviously can't stay into the second half. So we'll get them scheduled first. But I'll put together a schedule for that will be coming out. So that's the one that is fixed there. The second thing that we need a date for is, as I mentioned, we've transitioned out of the first connecting unit into the second connecting unit, which means I want to have a quiz on the first connecting unit. So my preference on that, and it's just my preference, so you guys can speak to this, is I like Tuesdays because that's when we have class. That's when we are the last class. So basically, once you're done your quiz, you're done, and you can go make dinner or whatever it is you're going to do at that point in your day. And given that you've got your midterms are this week on Wednesday, I would suggest, how about Tuesday becomes our Section 3 quiz. I got one thumbs up for that.
Sorry, did anybody you say want next week Tuesday?
Yeah, next week Tuesday, which is what is it? March let me look. March 5th. Not sure if Dan's giving me a fist bump or a punch in the face. Fist bump. Okay. Yes, the 5th. All right, so that seems to work. I will get that in the schedule so that it shows up for you. And then the last thing that we need to set a date for is midterm, which is the midterm reflection. Now, I wanted this to be late because I want you to have worked through most of your next build before you go and try and put this together. All right, so realistically, around the 15th, which is when we're doing the next one, is when I'd like you to be working on it. And that's just it's just a hand-in piece. But in terms of scheduling it around there, yeah, I want you to have most of that work in hand, I think, before you try and do the reflection on, hey, yeah, I am actually learning stuff, and it gives you it'll give you a better pool of things to draw on to talk about, I think. So I want you to have most of that in hand. But of course, if we leave it too long, then we don't have anything left to do new. Although once we block of material, fit a very different direction, we'll do a different build. So that usually gives people a lot of stuff to work with for their final reflection as well. So looking around that time frame, and this is a completely arbitrary date. How about if I schedule it for March 18th, which is the Monday after, but that's somewhat soft, in the sense that I need to put something in so that you have a target. But if you need a day or two of slough, that's just not a problem on this one, or even 3 days, as long as we plan it out. Let me know, kind of idea, when we get a little closer. So the idea would be, in my head anyway, you can tell me if this works for you or not, is that as you're working through the next build piece, which is going to dominate our work over the next 3 weeks, is working with the rules engine, and there's a piece of theory that we're going to apply into our build, but there's not a lot of construction from your part on that one. It's really about the rules engine stuff that you've started on, and improvements to dashboard setup and that kind of thing is what we're working on from a lab performance perspective for this next piece. As you're working through that, I think it would be good to have the midterm reflection stuff happening in your mind at the same time. That as you're working through that, you're starting to identify, okay, here's things that I actually wanted to talk about in my reflection. Here's a thing that I just did that's really good for me, and I want. So bringing those two things along in parallel, I think, makes sense. That you either physically or you're putting some of that learning out and noting it for yourself, starting to say, okay, yeah, I want to talk about that in my reflection, and what is it I want to say about it, and doing that when it's fresh is a better way to capture what's really going on with you. Um, Going back to it when you put it together and saying, okay, now that I've had a little bit of time to have that moment, I can also add in some more depth to, yeah, this has actually kept going, it's grown, it's transpired into something else, that kind of thing. But if you don't capture it at the moment, those are the time that's when you lose out on stuff, because you forget that it happened. You forget that, yeah, that was a good moment. That was an exciting moment. That was oh yeah, type section. And if if it's 2 weeks ago and you're trying to think, oh, what did I do? There was something, it's gone, right? For so many of us. So I think having that in mind as you're walking through the building piece, so you can note down what are those moments where you've had those victories, where you've had those advancements in understanding and knowledge development, that you can capture them in preparation for your reflection. I think that's a benefit. So that's why I would look at having the two dates be fairly close together, because I think that you don't want to treat them as separate events. You want to build them in conjunction with one another. So that's my mindset on it, and that's why I would look at. Um, Again, it doesn't really matter. March 19, which is the Tuesday for the reflection. Yeah, that should work all right. We'll probably have the next quiz on the 26th. That'll be about right. Right. So again, seeing a couple of that sounds good moments. All right. And I just point out, if something should change in the next little bit for some bizarre reason that we aren't seeing today, please let me know. All right. So some stuff that I will make sure shows up in your calendar for 5th, which is the next quiz. Yes. That's do you start doing your pre-presentations on the 18th, or is that the day they've still, it shouldn't matter much. And that's the point of picking dates like this now, is so you can say, okay, if I've got two things that are close together, how am I distributing my time? But again, that's one of those, should something go sideways and we need a little slush time on this when we have it. Okay, I guess that's the bonus with it all. All right. Good. All right. Thank you for that. That was good. My microphone is dropping downwards. I need to tighten it up. If I fade out entirely, it's because my microphone. Let me know. I'm looking past it and not really paying attention, and then suddenly it's hanging straight down and it's not getting any sound from me anymore. Okay. Got that. That's. I believe in Moodle we now have the next lab document is up. Let me pull it up here. And share that. So, like I said, this is probably something we won't start won't start doing anything serious with until probably Friday. And that's fine. But I want to get it going in your head a little bit here so that you've got the idea. So what are we looking at for lab competency demonstration number 2? And the idea here is that we're still working with ThingSport. We're going to extend what we're doing with it into a couple of specific directions. I make the note here in this document is posted in Moodle, so you can grab it from there too. You will extend your previous work that used both the Sensat and ThingSport. So if you go this to the next line, if you did not develop a purposeful design for your last presentation, you will want to do so now, especially because when you're working with the rule engine, if you don't have a reason for building your product, there's no way to figure out what rule should I push into place here. All right. So be aware of that. You want to be more purposeful about your design. So saying, yeah, I want a weather station. Okay. Well, why? To do what? What's special about your weather station? What is it you actually want to accomplish with your weather station? Why do you want a weather station? You want to put that question out clearly in front, because that's going to dictate what kinds of things you want your rule engine to do for you. All right. So that's really an imperative. If you don't do that and you start trying to write rules, you go, I don't know what to write. And you're right. You don't at that point. Okay. What rules you need is driven by what you're trying to accomplish. If you find that what you're trying to accomplish doesn't need any rules, it's too simple. All right. So you need to spend some time. If you have not already done so, you need to spend some time figuring out, well, why am I doing this? And we saw a range last time. There were people who had considered this already and have a good reason, and will be able to keep going from what they did, or maybe they've had new ideas since then and want to pursue a different tack with it. Either one is fine. So you can start with the work you started with already and extend it out, or you can work with something entirely different. That's entirely up to you. If you develop something different, understand that, again, it'll take a little extra time to get up to that floor level that doesn't yet exist. Of course, for some of you, what you built last time was fairly rudimentary. Not a big deal to bring something else up to that level. Okay. The last time we had some changes. I made changes to code, something that was graded. This time around, because we're going to change our transport, which we're going to talk more about, introduced today, I'm going to give you a new set of code. The new set of code I'm going to give you can be used as is, with the exception of, you got to put in your IP and your key for your device and things like that. But other than that, the code that I'm going to give you could just be used like it is given to you. Okay. And if you choose to do that, that's fine. If you decide, because some of you are good with this stuff, and based on what context you've got, it might make sense to do so. If you decide that you want to bring more weight into your code, I will include that as a marking piece for you. If you decide not to do that, there is no penalty for doing that. Your mark will come from other stuff entirely. Right. So how far down the I want to write some more Python road you go on this one is entirely up to you. The code I'm going to give you can use as is, and that's fine. Okay, but I want to be clear that, yeah, no, there is still the opportunity for you to go ahead and work with code. Okay, so that's what the second paragraph here is about. Like I said, I'm going to give you a piece of code that is basically intact. So, it sounds ominous in here. Hey, you have to actually get this thing working. Unless you do something really weird, it will work when you paste it in. Okay. Piece that will get graded is your dashboard. Again, we had to first go with dashboards last time, and we got to play around with it a little bit. And hopefully now you've, in playing with it once, that helps because you've touched it now and kind of get a feel for it. You also got to look at a bunch of different takes on what a dashboard could be. So yeah, we're going to say now let's raise our game. The bar goes up, but our ability to do something with our dashboard should go up accordingly with it. You've got a set of articles. They're not changing. They're the same ones we had before around, hey, what are good basic design principles? There's a list. Here's 8 things you should do. Here's 25 things you should do. If you aren't going through that list in terms of how am I designing my dashboard, how am I incorporating these things in here in a really quite conscious and overt way, then you're missing the point. So go back and through and say, okay, as I'm designing my dashboard for my context that I've got, that I've laid out, why am I doing the dashboard? Why am I doing this project at all? The dashboard is responsive to that. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that, based on what purpose I have, that's going to dictate, well, which things are the important pieces of data, which things are the less important pieces of data, which things are the detail pieces of data that I maybe want to drill down into. Right, so we've got that kind of idea around design. We'll also be able to incorporate a few more complex items into our dashboard. And that, again, is driven by, well, what makes sense for the dashboard I want to have. But we'll look at, there's a couple of little tutorials. You haven't done them yet. I haven't assigned them unless you've been playing around on your own. That go into, hey, here's some additional things you can do with a dashboard. So, for example, if you've got a device that has GPS, you can add that data and have it show up on a map kind of idea. There's all kind. You can do things like you can actually do drill downs. So data that shows up on a display, like a map display, data that or dashboards that maybe have location-based maps that then when you can drill down through that into, okay, here's a detailed dashboard. So you got dashboards that launch other dashboards that have more detail on them. So we're starting to see, you'll see that there are some ways to quickly architect some of that. That'll become part of, hey, here's some things you can look at, incorporating if it makes sense to do so based on the context that you're working in. So our dashboards can become more complicated. They can certainly become more useful. And definitely for a lot of us, we can be much more cognizant of what are the design profiles that we want to have. All right, so that's on the agenda again. It is in there. But our main focus is what we started just before break. And as I mentioned, the goal over break was to get to the point where you would wander through all of those different little tutorials and can now go, okay, yeah, I can do that stuff. Now you can start thinking about, okay, which things are going to become useful for me. I want to point out that when we do tutorials like that, the goal with them isn't just to do them or to finish them or to say, oh, look, I can type in that line the same as they did. They're models of, they're specific examples of broad techniques. All right. So, for example, the one that I worked with a bunch of people with on Friday before break, which is the one where you're taking data from 2 sensors and presenting that information. What they worked through in the tutorial was they said, wait, now we're starting to look at, we've got a bunch of devices that are virtually identical. And if you've got a large IoT implementation, you might have tens or hundreds or thousands of the same thing out there. How do you differentiate them? What do you do with that? So that was the one where you've got 2 warehouses, and the 2 warehouses each have an inside and an outside thermometer. So you had 4 thermometers. The thermometers all do exactly the same thing. They give you a temperature. The context where they live was the important thing then. Is this warehouse A or warehouse B? Is it inside or is it outside? Okay, which is not part of the data that the sensor generates. So in working through that, what they taught you was, wait a second, we need to be able to identify based on which device it is, then what are we doing with this? So we were able to then do things like, okay, when the data arrives, the message arrives, the message just has a temperature in it. The sensor doesn't know where it is. It has no ability to know that. It's just a sensor. So it doesn't arrive saying, here's the temperature inside at warehouse A. It just says the temperature is 21. And based on other things that you know within ThingsBoard, you had to then, and this is what the exercise had you do, was it had you add in, oh, if it's got this ID on it, that means it's the inside thermometer at warehouse A, or it's the outside thermometer at warehouse B, and you added that information in to the message or into the metadata. Actually, you added into the metadata. in that exercise. And then that meant that then further down the line in your rule engine, you could then do things with it.
I'm sorry.
If you wanted to, based on which thermometers are we looking at. Okay, so it made sense perhaps to compare the inside and outside temperatures at warehouse A. It doesn't make any sense to compare the inside temperature at warehouse A to the outside temperature at warehouse B and say, oh, let's be preemptive and do we need to turn the heat on? Well, no, that doesn't make any sense. They're not co-located, right? So that's how you introduce that idea. Each one of those exercises taught you a specific technique, but it has a broader meaning and a broader reason for being there that you got to identify and say, when do I want to use this? All right. So as we walk through what's happening with the rule engine, that's really where we're focusing in on. Did I delete a paragraph out of this? Oh, no, it looks about right. Yes, I did. I had a line selected. I hit something on my keyboard. Okay. So that'll be what we're working on over the next couple of weeks. So we've got 2 full Fridays plus intervening time in between to work on this. So I will help you with things like, I've got this piece I want to do in rule engine. Here's what I'm trying to do. Or I think I need a piece of script here. I will definitely help you with the scripts. Please don't run off and go, I can't figure out JavaScript. I will work with you on that and we will get it. We will get the JavaScripts done. You need to be able to tell me what it is you want to do very specifically, but I will absolutely help you with what's going on with the JavaScripts. So that's the idea. Okay. You've done, if you're up to date, you've done a set of, what was it, 8 or 10 little tutorial pieces that have you walk through different little bits of the rule engine. I'm skeptical that people have done all of that for the simple reason that the one to get mail sent always ends up causing people tons of grief. And I didn't get any notes over the break that, I can't get this to work. So either something's gone really well or, the email send one tends to cause people grief. Depending on which email service you use and how it wants to talk to things board, that can be the one. Yeah, Google works pretty good if that's what you're going to use. But people use all kinds of wacky things for their email sometime, and then that it gets weird. All right. So that's where we're coming into this. Yes. Yeah. There are specific things in the instructions that are it's clear it's in there, but it's the kind of thing exactly that kind of thing. The sysadmin one, not tenant, and that just people miss that there's this change of which account am I using within things board for it. So yeah, it is there, but usually I have more people who go, this didn't work, and we go through and go, oh, you gotta do this, or you missed this one thing somewhere. So it is what it is. Anyhow, this is where we're heading with it. In terms of the presentation you're going to do, again, grading on that is based on complexity and design. So doing really simple rules or ones that are basically mimic the ones from the tutorials is a thing, and it will get you through, but it won't get you a good mark. Okay. So again, this is where having a good context that generates I need a rule that's going to do this because my use case demands it. Let's make that rule happen. Okay. And then having that rule come to be is really where we're going here. Okay. When you present the stuff, so there'll be probably a little bit more prep for this presentation than there was for the last one, where we really just wanted to see it work. On this one, we're going to be a little more targeted in terms of you really want to describe for us how the rules you have implemented, again, highlighted is right here, make your product design better or more useful or more powerful. So the rule has a reason to live. has a reason to be there, and it makes my stuff better because it's there. All right, so that's the key thing there. I just wanted to put that in your head so you can start spinning on that. Probably the key decision you need before Friday is, do I want to continue building what I started with, or do I want to take this in a different direction at this point? And to have that decision made when you come in. All right. I'll pause there for a moment to say our questions on any of that. I know we have lots of time on Thursday and Friday to go into that, but if there's anything that's popped up right now. Okay. Seeing nothing. What's listed in module 3? So I think it's one chapter IoT booklet, and then there was a secondary booklet, a secondary PDF that was a more detailed look at the same things that were in the chapter. And that one, again, because it's stuff we didn't work with practically at all, it's really much more of a theoretical focus on it. Again, things like you've seen the kind of questions you've seen before. You've got like, it's, well, when would you use that, or given this thing, which one would you choose, or those kinds of things, to try and, again, driving you towards, can you show that you understand what they're about in terms of making an application into something that you might actually do. Okay. Get beyond just I can recount, no idea what it means. I can regurgitate it back, which is not really our goal in learning this stuff. If you can't use it, you don't have functionality with it, and it's not good enough, I guess, is what I'd say about that. So questions tend to move towards, especially the written ones, move towards, how are you going to use it? Can you justify it? Kind of idea. So to have a look through some of that. There is some more technical stuff in there, and being able to distinguish on some of that is probably helpful as well. Okay, so that's looking backwards. I want to look forwards now. Our next chunk of stuff within the section we're doing is a take on connection. I'm going to record this piece. So let me just turn that on and talk a little bit about our friend MQTT.
Recording in progress.
Right, we're recording. So I want to introduce to you a protocol that is going to be a better transport for us. With what we've worked with so far, we've done our stuff where we're using HTTP. We used HTTP because it's something that you are passingly familiar with, at least, even if you don't understand the nuts and bolts of it. You all have used it extensively. You have a pretty good handle, whether you realize it or not, on how it works. Okay, HTTP is the protocol that's used by the web. It's a client server protocol that uses a request reply type methodology. Okay, where most of us use it is we have a web browser, want to get a web page, web server. So our browser makes a request for the contents of the page, and the server replies. Okay, that's what it was developed for, is exactly that kind of scenario. If we look at what we have there, we do in fact have the ability to ask for stuff. We also have the ability, and you've seen it both through the web and through what we've worked with here, to push data up. So the two key methods, if you will, within HTTP are, I can do a get, which is give me the stuff. I can do a post, which is, oh, here's some stuff you might be interested in. Okay. And that's all initiated from a client. Within our HTTP model, realistically, at no time does the server ever contact my web browser. It responds to my web browser, but it never initiates. Okay. So within this, the conversation is effectively unidirectional, or at least in terms of how it gets initiated. It's always my client initiates a conversation with the server. Okay, there is no opportunity for the server to initiate pushing data down at me. Also within that, and you guys have seen this, I know you've done captures on, well, what happens when you open a web page? How many connections do you actually open? Thinking about this from a networker's perspective. Can you tell me about that? Anybody ever noticed? How many sessions? Nobody's got anything. Effectively, what happens is every request that I make opens a new session. So when I open a web page, my first request is, give me the page. At which point the HTML code is shipped to me. Okay, that's great. I've got this HTML document. If you've ever looked at HTML as a document for a website, you know that what it has is, okay, here's you put this image here, put this block of text here, put this thing here, put that thing there. Go get this ad from this other resource. Okay, so there's all these resources. So the HTML page that I pull down first is really just, here's the resources you need and here's how you arrange them on the page. It does not contain, for the most part, those resources. Every one of those resources I want to get is another request. So if I've got a page that has, a header that's a graphic and a couple more graphics, and if it's anything commercial, it's got a bunch of ads on it, like that. So now I've got to make a request for each single one of these other things has to be required. Every single one of those requests is a new session. This is one of the things that makes HTTP less than ideal for our IoT case, where all of a sudden every piece of data is a new session. Okay, there are extensions and things like that, ways you can try and work around this, but out of the box, that's how HTTP works. Okay, which means I get lots of sessions established. Given how we use it with a web browser on a usually pretty good internet connection, it doesn't matter. I've got one web browser up. It's got, okay, so it's running 20 sessions or 100 sessions, or who cares how many, right? It's just not a big deal. It's lots, but within the scope of what my network can hold and what my browser can hold and what I can do with, RAM and things like that on the box, it's just not a problem. Where this becomes intriguing, though, is when we start applying this into different contexts. And that's IoT. We have a very different context. So there are some things that become very challenging within the HTTP protocol. One of these is that what if I actually want my server to initiate something? Okay, let's think about the example we've got. I've got a Raspberry Pi or some other device. Let's think some other device, but some other sensing device, smart device, and I need to push firmware updates to it. I've got 1,000 of them deployed. Okay, and I'm going to say, okay, my server has the firmware update. How do my devices, if I use an HTTP model, they have to periodically request, hey, is there an update for me on firmware? At which point they could request a newer one. So they could say, if I've got this one, do you have a newer one for me? That's the request. And the reply could be, yes, here it is. And then it could go ahead and do it. But you need to build that into what it does periodically. So again, firmware updates don't happen that often. But So how often do you want your device asking? At the same time, if the firmware update is a security patch, you want to know really fast. You want it deployed right away. Okay, so you really want the server to be able to handle that. You want the server to be able to drive that. So support that. We need something else that will. Problematic. Let me look at a specific example. So let's go with, let me share a screen. There we go. So for example, this is City of Kelowna. They have a smart and intelligent city initiatives. This is their website. Okay. And in 2020, they actually published an intelligent city strategy guide. Pretty spiff, huh? Yeah. 34 pages of around vision principles, what we're trying to do, those kinds of things. Not surprisingly, one of the pieces that fits into an intelligent city strategy is developing some IoT stuff. So City of Kelowna, and it's not unique in this by any means, lots of places are doing things like this, has developed a IoT-centric data gathering strategy for a lot of stuff. Okay, not limited to, but certainly an exemplar that they would use is their traffic light management system, which does all kinds of things and is highly automated, but also is fully live with, we're gathering data, making decisions, changing light patterns based on what we're gathering off of what's actually happening out in traffic. Okay, so that's a simple example, but there's lots of stuff. They've got a whole strategy here. And so not surprisingly, there's a bunch of data coming in, and a bunch of it looks like IoT data. Different question, let's say, who actually owns this data? Whose data is this? It's yours. It's gathered by the city. This belongs to the public. It belongs to the citizens of the city. Okay, so how do we make that available to them? Well, what we do is what happens right now is you put up a web page. Okay? If you really want to make the data accessible, you might publish an API that allows people to download the data set so they can work with it. Okay, neither of these is a particularly ideal solution for a couple of reasons. The first is you don't get to dictate what the web page is going to look like. So they're going to put up a dashboard of here's the dashboard of our metrics. That's great. What if you don't have the metric I want up there explained in the way I want it? Conversely, I could download the data set, but what I get when I download a data set is I get a static copy of it. I don't get anything real time. How often they update that and publish that to that data set might vary wildly. Might be maybe once a day they'll update the data set to pull. Maybe once a week, maybe once a month. Maybe it's forgotten by some guy because he was doing it off the side of his desk and it's been 6 months. Who knows, right? When I have to pull a data set, that's always going to be old static information. I can't get anything that's live off of that. So we've got an interesting set of circumstances here. We've got a very different, potentially a bunch of different use cases that don't fit that web-based HTTP client server request reply model. Let's think of it in a whole different way. We've got all this data being gathered by Kelowna. Okay, well, that's good for the city, but maybe the province wants to know, hey, we'll get the data from Kelowna, we'll get the data from Kamloops, we'll get the data from Penticton, we'll get the data from Vancouver, we'll get the data from Victoria, and let's compare that and see how it works. How do these different places do with this stuff? Okay, how do they get that? How do they accumulate across all those things? Then the government of Canada says, well, we want to gather this data from all these cities across the country. How do they gather all of that data? Are they just going to go and pull all the APIs? I guess they could. And, given how some of the governments work, maybe that delay in time is fine for them. But if you're trying to do anything live, trying to get access to one of the things about IoT data is we often we do it because we want to be responsive to what's happening right now. Okay. And if you want to have that and have that be shareable, you need a different model for how do I get this? So when we look at different levels of government, what we really have is we have different consumers of the data stream. I mean, let's face it, if Kelowna receives the data, Kelowna is not going to build a dashboard for the provincial government. First of all, they don't have the other cities' data. And second, why would they be the ones on the hook for that? So how does the province get the data? How does the federal government get the data? So we've got here is we need a very different model. So we're going to look at a protocol that uses, instead of a request reply model, uses what we call a publish subscribe model, where the data source shares the data into what we call a broker. And then anybody can subscribe to the broker. Anybody with sufficiently authorized can subscribe to the broker to say, I want these pieces of data. So what we can have then is we end up with a centralized piece called a broker, which is a data aggregation point. So we can gather from all kinds of different sensors, different data initiators. It all arrives at this broker, and then anybody who wants access to some of that data can say, I'll subscribe to that. Okay. So if I've got, let's do a simple example. If I've got a weather station that's doing temperature, wind speed, humidity, air pressure, stuff like that, that whole set of numbers, it gathers it all, ships it to the broker. Maybe somebody's interested in all that stuff, but maybe they're not. Maybe they just want to know the temperature. So they can subscribe into that and say, I just want the temperature, give me the temperature. And what will happen then is when every time a new temperature arrives at the broker, because this person has subscribed, this user has subscribed, when a new edition of data comes in, it gets forwarded onto all the subscribers. So in this way, we can have a single source of data be shared out to multiple endpoints, multiple entities. So my temperature could go to Kelowna, it could go to the province, it could go to Ottawa, or wherever else they're hosting their stuff. Watch my time here. Good. Okay. So we see a very different model, a very different structure that we can implement by changing our protocol. HTTP doesn't do that really well. Again, we have to kludge it somehow, whereas we can develop a protocol that will, in fact, do exactly that. If we build it with IoT in mind, we talked earlier about this idea that one of the things that's really important for us is we need to do stuff at really low utilization levels. If we're dealing with stuff that's battery powered, if we're dealing with, those, especially battery power, that's the huge one, right? We have limited processing power. We have limited power, limited processing ability, limited power in a lot of our IoT devices. How do we maximize what we get out of that? And we don't do it by using fat protocols that will use up lots of bandwidth on high power wireless connections. So we want to set up a system that is better, is more optimized towards IoT than HTTP is. So for example, as soon as I send any piece of data with HTTP, the header on that is 8 bytes. If my data is a 2-digit number, well, that's 2 bytes. So my whole thing is 10 bytes. Okay, well, 10 bytes, that doesn't sound like much, does it? Okay. What if it's an industrial plant and I've got 2,000 cents this 10 times a second? You can do the math. All of a sudden, I've got a lot of data running around. Okay. Or maybe I've got, like we saw in that one example we put up, that building in the Intel place in Israel that had 50,000 sensors in the building. At 50,000 sensors, even if all I'm doing is moving, we're moving a little bit bigger data packet than 2 bytes, but Even if that's all I'm doing, it's still going to ramp up pretty fast. All right. So any way I can get my packet size down is helpful. We're going to introduce and work with a protocol called MQTT, which does all of these things as a header size of 2 bytes. So instead of being a 10 byte packet, I can get it down to, for 2 bytes of data, I can get it down to 2 bytes of header and 2 bytes of data. The other thing that it does is it allows me to establish a single connection. So all the overhead that goes into establishing a connection happens once. And then I'm moving effectively, if I'm doing 2 byte data, 4 byte packets. That's it. Keep in mind, we talked about HTTP. Every time I want to do a request, I have to start a new session. There's overhead in establishing a session, bytes and bytes of it. So it's one thing to say, yeah, I've got my data piece is, has a header of 8 bytes in HTTP, but there's a whole bunch more overhead that goes into just establishing the session before I can move the data. Okay, so tomorrow, what's really going on with that? But the idea here is we've got a protocol that will deal with a bunch of the problems that HTTP in a way that is really sensitive to what IoT. And that's what we're going to play with for the next
recording stopped.
All right. I have stopped the file. I stopped the recording, so I'll post that up as an introduction. We will carry on with that some tomorrow. The last thing I'll leave you with is if you were working through some of the examples and any of them you need me to actually live demo here. So for the ones that I thought were tricky, I posted videos already that you can watch. But if you need me to go back through any of that because it just isn't happening, isn't clear, or something has dramatically changed from what you're seeing in the tutorial and video, please let me know and we'll build in some time this week that I can do that. All right. With that, I turn you loose. I will see you tomorrow.